In my last video, I built this table. And since then, I've managed to sell it for 500 bucks. But now I've bought a new one, and this one is completely different. So this is the table that I've bought. It's about 100 years old, and it shows. It's covered in a very old layer of shellac that has already started to peel off. As you can see, there's a lot of damage to the top and also to the side of the whole table. I'm definitely gonna need to fix this, but first let's try and take this thing apart. As you can see, there are separate locking mechanisms for a couple of the drawers on the whole table, and to take it apart I first need to open them. But I've lost the key, so I'm gonna use this screwdriver. After getting out these 4 drawers on the sides, I can open the whole table. And in it houses a sewing machine. I think this design looks insanely cool. This is the feature why I wanted to buy this whole table, because it means that I can have a table and a sewing machine in one. Now let's get started on taking this thing apart. First I remove the easy ones, the drawers. Then I try to remove the middle one, but that's not gonna work. So I'm gonna need to take it apart a bit more. But you can observe the serious wobble that the machine has. Now the sewing machine is helped out by this spring on the side, which eases it in to its little crevice inside of the table. But I can take the machine apart with just removing these 2 hinges that are loosely connected to the side with some screws. In the restoration process, not only will I have to restore all of the wooden components of the table, but all the metal ones also. So this is going to be a serious challenge. As you can see, the components are piling up, and this means that I'm probably going to be spending a lot of time with this machine. But as an engineer, I find it absolutely fascinating that so many of these tiny components can come together and create something this functional and this beautiful. So I really want to give it its due diligence and make it as pretty as I can. I haven't managed to upload a video in a while, and that is because this project took a seriously long time, and I was also finishing up my university exit exams. So this was kind of a project that I did on the side while I was working and while I was studying for my master's degree in engineering. But because of this, I will not be able to show you everything, since I have so much footage of me just disassembling this machine and cleaning it up that I'm probably gonna skip a couple of parts which would be boring to watch on camera. As you can see, I'm making some quite good progress on the whole table, and I've managed to get the whole tabletop down to its bare bones, and now it's time to move on to the bottom. And this is where the serious challenge comes in that I've mentioned earlier, because the spring mechanism and the housing of the sewing machine is pretty critical, and if I can't manage to assemble it back in one piece, then this whole table will be meaningless and useless. So I'm making sure to collect these screws and these components in a safe space so that I can reassemble everything back together just the way it was. There is a small moving guard which houses the sewing machine inside of the table and protects it from any debris. And to remove this, I'm going to be disassembling the chain by bending it. And I don't think that this will damage it in any significant way, as I can just bend it back in place. Now let's move on to the spring mechanism. As with every other component of the whole table, it is made up of really interesting looking parts. As you can see, these were probably cast from iron, and these are some really hard to manufacture and hard to produce parts. So this table must have cost a lot back in its day. But I bought it for like 25 bucks, so it's a laughable amount of money compared to the craftsmanship of this machine. Every single metal component has its serial number and also the type of the machine stamped into it, which is, I think, a really cool touch. After removing these couple of bolts, I can lift the tabletop off and it's finished, it's disassembled. Getting this table apart was fun, but now comes the real menacing part, where I have to clean every single component. Check it out, how many there are. I really didn't need to do this, but I decided on making this time lapse of all the components, every single nail and screw in the table, and I just laid it out on these two pieces of drywall so you can see better how many different parts there are, which I will need to clean up in the next segment of the video. Imagine how much time it must have took to manufacture every single one of these and to assemble them all together into one functioning machine. All of them will need to be restored. The wooden parts will need to have their shellac finish removed, and I need to apply a new finish to them. And all the metal components will need to be restored. And I'm gonna do this with sanding and basic rust removal tools. Here you can see where two of the tabletop parts were assembled, and it's really dirty and some grease has seeped in to the wood. But even on the spots where grease hasn't seeped in, the shellac has kind of started to peel off. So my first job is to get these back to bare wood, and for that I'm gonna be using solvents. I have here benzene, paint remover, denatured alcohol, and paint thinner. So first I'm gonna do a chemical test and test out which solvent removes the shellac cover the best. I'm conducting this test on these small pieces of wood as they won't really have an impact on the look of the machine. But I found that denatured alcohol works best for removing shellac. Here you can see them compared to the old finish and just bare wood. As you can see, near the screws there is still some discoloration, but unfortunately I have no way of removing that other than sanding. So I'm going to be trying to get rid of these in the next part, but I don't think that I will succeed, as the rust from the screws has really seeped in to the grain of the wood, and I really don't want to sand down that much from any component. So I seem to have found a good process that works. First, I wipe them off with denatured alcohol. Then I hit them with some sandpaper and then go back to denatured alcohol once again. This will result in a bare wooden finish, which I can prepare any way I want to. Here you can see the difference that my finishing process has made. These drawers look way better than before, and I can take on a more serious challenge. This component is so dirty and so disgusting looking that it's gonna take some real elbow grease to clean it up. This is the underside of the table, so this protects the sewing machine from all the nasty stuff that could get in. So I'm gonna need to take off all the dirt that has accumulated in over 100 years. And I wasted almost $20 on denatured alcohol just finishing up this component. But now it's starting to look somewhat like wood and not just something covered in black tar. Okay, let me show you how I finish up all the metal components. First, I tried boiling them in vinegar, as I've seen in some life hack video, but this proved to be an idiotic decision. So I bought some rust remover, and this is basically phosphoric acid, and I just dumped a bunch onto some screws and let it sit for a couple of days. Here you can see the before picture of the phosphoric acid, and as you can see, some bubbles are releasing. That means that the chemical reaction is occurring. And after about 2 days, this is what it did to all the rust. It left all the metal components nice and shiny looking and deactivated all the iron oxide that was on the surface of the metal. After cleaning each metal part, I spray them with a bit of oil, as I don't want them to develop rust once again before I have had a chance to finish them. I hope you have enjoyed the video up till this point, and if you have, I would appreciate your subscription to the channel. It would mean a lot to me to see this channel grow and to see my hobby become something more. But anyways, back to the video. It's more difficult to remove the shellac from these surfaces because they were horizontal, and it's not just shellac that I want to remove. It's also the years and years of dirt and dust that has collected on the surface. And this means that I will have to use some more brutal tools. So you can see me using this small vibration sander that will make short work of all the collected dust and dirt that is on the top parts of the table. And besides, I'm only taking off about 0.3 of a millimeter from the thickness of the table, so hopefully this won't impact the fit and the sizing of the machine. I think that the difference between the sanded surface and the unsanded surface is significant, and I think that the look of the whole thing is generally improved. And especially when you compare it to an unfinished piece, there is some significant change and some significant revitalization going on. As I was removing the dust and the dirt, I managed to find a new technique to remove the shellac that has collected on the surface. And I basically just pour a bit onto the top surface and then use a metal scraper to scrape off all the nasty stuff that has collected on the top. After scraping it off, this black tar kind of solidifies into a ball of nasty, hard, tacky stuff that is really disgusting. So I'm going to have to choose a different finish because this just won't do with modern times. With this scraping, I can reduce the amount that I have to sand off by a significant margin, and the color of the wood is evidence for this, since it is way lighter than before. Up till now, you've seen me do these smaller pieces, but now for the most difficult part. This is the largest wooden piece on the table, and it's gonna require about 2 days worth of work. So I've prepared myself accordingly, and I need to scrape off all the tar first. As you can see, I've invested in a larger scraper, and this makes the job way easier. Even though it is labor intensive, it is pretty satisfying work. As you can see, the wood is peeking out from underneath all that nasty stuff that has collected in about 100 years. With my previous attempts at sanding down the smaller components, I have gunked up my sandpaper, so I went to the hardware store and bought like 50 of them. Hopefully that will be enough. Now, after putting on all the safety gear, I am ready to do the sanding. This was a super long but also a super fun job. I sanded everything down and they look way prettier than they were before, and are now ready to apply the finish. Even though my workshop is covered in dust, I am very pleased with how they turned out. Finally, hard part's done. Now it's time to reap what I have sown. And by that, I mean the rewards. So, let's get this thing painted and assembled. Before trying to finish anything, I first cleaned everything off with some denatured alcohol to make sure that there wasn't any grease or any dust that was on the wooden pieces. Then I chose this lacquer, which is about medium thickness, and you can sand it down really easily. And I applied 2 coats to every single surface, then sanded it down. Then I applied another 2 coats, so 4 in total. And this resulted in a pretty nice kind of glossy color of wood, but also it kept the natural hue of the wood, so it didn't really change the tone that the wood was in. I wanted to keep the whole piece looking as original as I could. So basically restore it to the condition that it was originally produced in. And I know that the lacquer isn't the same as the shellac that was applied, but this meant that it would be much more withstanding towards time, and I think that it would look a bit nicer as well. So here you can see the first 2 layers of paint, and it looks pretty nice, but there are still some rough edges from the grain that was lifted up due to the moisture in the lacquer that I have applied. So after sanding, you can see the second drawer, and after sanding and another 2 coats, you can see the third one. And I think that generally there's not much improvement between the techniques, but I'm still going to apply all 4 layers with some sanding in between too. This, I think, is the reward of this project. Like, having to finish these pieces was a nightmare up till this point, but the painting process is always the most fun. And I don't mean nightmare in the sense that I don't enjoy the work. I mean nightmare in the sense that it covers the workshop in dust, it smells exceedingly bad, and it also takes up a bunch of time. Whereas painting is pretty fast, as you can see. And it's not just fast, it shows results instantly. So you can see how much effort you have put in your project, because every mistake that you have made in the sanding process or in removing the lacquer will show in this phase. And thankfully, I think that I don't see that many mistakes on the whole piece. But if you find any, please let me know in the comment section. Now every single component is restored. I didn't show the metal parts that much, but I think that that was mostly uninteresting stuff. But on these large components, I repainted them black and applied a glossy finish to them. On the screws, I just sanded all the heads down, and you can see the difference that a couple of minutes of sanding made on them. I'm going to start the assembly off with the drawers. First, I need to assemble the frames that hold the drawers. These are made out of 9 wooden components, 3 of which are these frames, and 6 of them are these wooden like strips. And they are attached with 6 screws on one side and 12 nails on the other side. Each of the screws and nails were individually cleaned, so they should look nicer than if I had just left them with the old finish, kind of rusted and odd looking. The main issue I had with the table is that there was a lot of wobble in it, so not many things were tightened. But since my finish has seeped into the screw holes, it made the screws tight once again. So that means that I will have a more rigid frame for each connection point, and that should hopefully result in a less wobbly table. These frames are pretty expertly manufactured, since the wooden strips have cutouts that are the exact same radius as the frame parts. So this means a really tight and really nice looking connection between the 2 parts. And here you can see the side of the frame in which the nails were hammered in. So this side is going to sit flush with the other components of the table, so it won't be visible at all. But still, I wanted to get it as nice as I could. So that's the finished 2 frames. What do you think? I think they turned out awesome. Now let's move on to the technical stuff. I want to attach the spring first, as this is one of the most complex components. But I won't be able to attach it with every single screw, only 2 of them, since the thickness of the table is not at its final dimension, and I need to attach the top part of the tabletop as well to tighten those 2 screws fully. So I'm going to hold off on that for a bit. But let's attach the spring anyway for now. There's a hole that holds the spring in place, and I can tighten it down with a bolt that is attached through both ends of the spring assembly. I won't be able to tighten the spring to its final tension yet, because I need to assemble it with the sewing machine too. So I'm going to hold off on tightening it to its final tightness and just attach it for the time being loosely. Next, before attaching the drawer frames to the sides, which is going to be the last step, I'm going to work on attaching the middle drawer. There are these two wooden blocks that hold one side of the hinges that work the action of the middle drawer. The hinges are made up of 2 and 2 components which are attached with screws to the blocks. These are not the easiest to get perfectly done, since the fit is quite important with this. Because the hinges are made of 2 separate pieces on each side, they are going to have to be tightened and loosened according to the fit of the machine. And since I've already messed up the fit with sanding and refinishing, I'm going to have to tune it to perfection with some trial and error. After playing around with the fit, I managed to get it down just right, so attaching it will be no problem at all. I just need to tighten these 2 screws and the drawer is attached, and it works like a charm. Next is the internal guard of the sewing machine, which is made up of 2 wooden parts that are connected together by these wooden hinges. Also, there is a chain attached to the moving part, which will have to be attached to the spring mechanism of the whole table. This spring mechanism will probably be the last thing that is done on the sewing machine, and I won't get to show it because it is really difficult to get a camera into such a tight corner. But you can imagine how I bend the chain back in place. Next is to assemble the other piece of the tabletop. This is connected with 6 or 7 screws that are positioned around the perimeter of the large cutout in the table. Getting these lined up was a pretty big challenge, but in the end I managed to do it pretty quickly. So after that, it's time to assemble the inner guard. This is just connected with 4 very, very small bolts. After attaching this inner guard and kind of hiding the spring components, I was starting to believe that I was actually going to be able to restore this whole table. And I'm pretty pleased with that, because this had so many parts and it was kind of hard to keep track of every single component and where they went. So after attaching the 2 drawer frames, I just tightened down the 4 screws on each side, and then the underside is pretty much done. And it's time to move on to the hinges on the other side, which connect the tabletop to its other 3 moving parts. So let's flip it over and get this thing finished. I gave it a little shake to see how much wobble there is, and it's absolutely 0. Now for the hinges. It was quite hard to keep track of where every screw went, so I rewatched my previous videos and recordings, and I managed to figure out which screw goes into which hole. By the way, all hinges were coated in a thin layer of copper, and unfortunately I couldn't reproduce this effect, so I had to sand down the copper layer to expose the bare metal underneath. And this means that the sewing machine table won't be as accurate as I wanted it to be, but unfortunately, without an electrocoating machine, I couldn't have reproduced the coating in any nice manner. So I decided on just having the bare steel plates polished to a nice kind of shiny finish. And after attaching every single screw, the other components of the table could be attached as well. This is the large side extension, which kind of extends the work surface on which the fabric can slide during sewing. So this is quite an important piece. I was quite worried that taking off 0.3 millimeters of thickness during the sanding process would make this not sit flush, but thankfully my worries were unfounded and it turned out pretty great. Next, it's this smaller piece, which is also attached with hinges and 3 screws on each side. And it was quite difficult to get the hinges attached perfectly, but I think I've managed to do a great job. Now, after sliding in all the drawers, the table is complete. Before I can show you the beauty shots and the assembly to the legs, I want to say a couple of words. It was such a fun challenge to assemble this table and to understand how each small component fits together to create something better than itself. And hopefully by the end of next month I will have a fully functional Singer sewing machine, which is the end goal of this project, to have an old foot pedal sewing machine that I can use to sew whatever I want. And in the future I plan to produce way more videos, but mainly focus on sewing, because that is seriously my passion, and if I can do it with a machine as beautiful as this, then hopefully that will make some good content for you guys. Anyways, let me show you the beauty shots. This is the leg of the sewing machine, which I have upholstered in a previous video. And now all that's left for me to do is to put on the tabletop and call this project done. And finally I can show you the beauty shots. Check it out. And I am happy to say that every drawer works as intended, and every single moving component is in its right place. At least that's what I think now, but the real question is, will I be able to get the sewing machine inside of it? But that's for the next video, so if you wanna see that, please subscribe to my channel. Other than that, goodbye and see you guys in the next one. Bye bye, see ya.